collar of the borrowed bunker coat as the wind spat a handful of sharp snow pellets against his exposed neck. If Camille really was in need of rescue, they had to find her soon. It'd be dark in a couple of hours, and the weather would only get worse. Jogging across the street, Steve caught up with the chief on Mrs. Lynde's doorstep, just seconds before she opened the door. "Well, come in," she fussed, stepping back so they could both enter. "You're letting the heat out." Steve closed the door behind them, but Mrs. Lynde didn't look any happier. Then again, he'd never seen her look happy about much of anything. "Steve Springfield?" she asked, and he gave her a nod of greeting. "Does this mean you're finally back for good, then? 'Bout time you stopped traipsing around the world and came home. Your poor parents will finally be able to relax and enjoy their retirement." Steve set his molars to keep from telling Mrs. Lynde that rather than traipsing around the world, he'd only been a few hours' drive up into the mountains, that his poor parents were happily basking in the New Mexico sun, and that none of that was really her business anyway. The chief must have guessed some of what Steve wanted to say, because he cleared his throat and flicked an amused glance at him. "Mrs. Lynde, what time did you see Camille leave?" "Like I already told the dispatcher, it was at 10:48 yesterday morning. I know that because I was on the elliptical downstairs, watching out the front window. I always go a full 60 minutes, from 10 to 11, and the display showed 48 minutes. Camille walked outside without locking her door, even though I keep telling her she's going to be brutally murdered if she's not careful, and went into the woods across the street." "You haven't seen her return?" the chief asked, scribbling in his small flip notebook. "She hasn't gotten back yet." Mrs. Lynde's tone was certain. "She's been gone for a day and a half. Her car hasn't moved. I even checked the snow for footprints by the garage and on the front walk. She's still out there, probably freezing to death, unless she's been kidnapped to be sold into sex slavery." Steve blinked. "Doubt there's much of a risk of that around here." "You've been gone for years," Mrs. Lynde scolded. "Things have changed in Bourne. It's not the sleepy little town you left." "It's still pretty sleepy," the chief said as he wrote. "There's been a huge jump in crime." Mrs. Lynde folded her arms over her narrow chest and glared. The chief didn't seem to feel her laser-like stare burning holes in his downturned head. "Not really," he said. "There is crime, Chief Rodriguez." Mrs. Lynde's voice was frosty. "What about the felon who took Misty Lincoln's lawn furniture?" "That was her ex-husband." The chief finally looked up from his notes. "And I believe he'd been awarded it in the divorce." Mrs. Lynde huffed, but he spoke again before she could start rattling off any other local crimes. "Do you know where Camille was headed?" Although she held her glare for a few moments, Mrs. Lynde finally let it go. "Probably to find all sorts of trash for her things." Mrs. Lynde gestured vaguely in the direction of Camille's house. "Her things?" Steve opened his mouth to ask for clarification when the chief flipped his notebook closed. "Did you try calling her?" "Of course. It goes to her voicemail. Her full voicemail, so I couldn't even leave a message." The chief moved to open the door. "Give the dispatcher a call if you spot her, or if she calls you back." Mrs. Lynde gave them a tight nod as they left her house and walked toward Camille's. Steve kept an eye out for any footprints, but he had to concur with Mrs. Lynde on that. The only things he spotted were some blurry indentations leading away from the house. He assumed they were from when Camille had left. Her elderly car was parked on the street, covered by a light blanket of fresh snow. "I'm still not sure why you're so certain she's not with a friend," Steve said as he climbed the front steps and pounded on her door. There was just the silence of an empty house on the other side. "Camille's not really the drop-in on friends sort," the chief said absently, peering into a window. "The few times I've seen her out in public have been at odd hours. Times